Hey everybody. Today I want to take a little detour and talk about something that's only tangentially related to websites, and that's working with a photographer for your website. This came up because of a conversation that I saw in a Facebook group where they were talking about working with website photographers and some of the challenges that they were having. One of the big challenges that I see is that people don't realize that working with a website photographer or commercial photographer is a lot different than working with a portrait photographer or an event photographer. The skill sets are completely different, they're trained differently, and they have to think about different things. So hopefully some of the tips in here help you out when you're finding a photographer and when you're working with them. So let's start off with just hiring a photographer. This is something you do not want to leave up to your client. You want to be involved in the process, even though the client's going to be the ultimate decision maker, but you can't just let them go off and find somebody because they don't know. They haven't worked with photographers. They don't know what they're looking at for their websites. They don't know what kind of photography they need for their websites. So it's really going to be up to you to help guide that process. Once you've found a few photographers, make sure you're looking at the work that's relevant to what you need for your project. If you need staff photos, make sure you're looking for a good headshot photographer. If you're looking for product photos, make sure you're looking at a good product photographer. If you need things for hero images, again, just make sure that they're doing the kind of work that you need. Like I said before, general photography doesn't really translate into what you need for a website. When photographers are typically trained, they're trained to zoom in really close on subjects, they're trained to crop in tight, and they're trained to be the center of attention. What you need for a website is usually not that. You typically need something that's got some more space, that's pulled back a little bit, that has room for type, and that blends with the rest and supports the rest of the website, not something that dominates it. So that kind of leads me into the next conversation, and that's about art direction. Just like you're probably not going to be the person to do the hiring, you also should not be the person to be on point for art direction, although you do need to stay involved. The marketing director, whoever it is that you are working with on the website project, is probably going to need to be the decision maker for the art direction. And just like you typically like working with a single decision maker, so is the photographer. They're going to appreciate that. You can have some input, you can work with your client, but ultimately they're the ones running the shots. Similarly, just like you need inspiration and reference when you're coming up with a design for the website, the photographer also needs the same thing. They need to understand what you're looking for. They need inspiration photos. They need to understand the requirements for your project. If you leave it up to them, they're going to either do whatever it is that they want to do, or they're going to look at the existing website for inspiration, and that probably isn't the direction that you want to go. Next, you want to make sure that you plan your shots. Have a shot list. Understand what photographs you need, where they're going to go, and then have some just general photographs that you want to get as well. Things that don't quite fit into pages that you're working on yet, but that you might want to swap in from time to time. Having that shot list is going to keep everybody focused and directed on the right things. Make sure the photographer shoots wide. Again, most photographers are trained to crop in really tight and come in closer to the subject. One of the things that we taught in photography school was you can never be too close to your subject. Well, in commercial photography, that's completely the opposite. You need to go back. You need to have room for cropping different sizes. You need to have room for breathing. You need to have room for text and typography. So make sure that they're doing that. One of the biggest mistakes that I see is when they're creating images for heroes is that they do not leave enough space for type. And this is going to be the same whether they're doing hero photographs for a website or whether they're doing spreads for a traditional page layout. Generally, you want to have the subject on one side or the other and room for type and text on the other side. And that side that does not have the subject needs to have kind of a plain background, something that's not going to distract from the text. So you probably don't want to do it in front of, flowers or anything that's really busy. You want something that's going to be very neutral, something that can kind of fade away into the background so that the text can take front and center. Commercial photography pricing is generally going to be more expensive than you expect, especially if you only have a frame of reference from things like weddings and other events or from family portraits. A commercial photography, it will typically be 3, 4, maybe even 5 times more than that. And if they need to have assistants or do set design, that price is only going to go up. This is one of those things that's going to be very, very market dependent. A photographer in Washington, D.C. or New York or L.A. are going to cost way different than somebody in the Midwest. That's just a fact of life. I can't really give you any type of guidelines on what they cost. You're going to need to look around your area, talk to lots of photographers, and get a sense for that yourself. Just remember, you don't want to go cheap. But at the same time, you probably don't want the most expensive ones either, and price doesn't always equal quality. Licensing and contracts for commercial photography is going to be way different than what you're used to. Typically for a website, once you build the project, the client owns it. With photography and videography, that's going to be completely different. They usually are going to retain copyright unless you pay out the nose to get that transferred. So typically, commercial photographs are going to be priced based on usage and time frame. When you start working with the really big name commercial photographers, they're going to give you very limited usage and very limited time frame. They might say that you get to use this in a single campaign for print for a period of 1 year. Now, for a website, you generally are going to want something a little bit more loose than that. So typically what I would ask for is going to be unrestricted usage for an infinite period of time or an indefinite period of time. You may or may not get that depending on who you're working with. But you want to be able to have the flexibility to use this on various parts of the website. You want to be able to use it for landing pages, for the main website, and you may or may not need it for print. That's something that you would need to negotiate with them. The biggest thing to remember, though, is not to come right out and say, I want copyright of these photos, because any commercial photographer is just going to kind of laugh at you, or they're going to 10x that price. Now let's talk a little bit about the deliverables and the output files. You generally do not want to ask for the digital negatives or the raw files. Again, any commercial photographer worth their salt is not going to give them to you. That's kind of like you handing over a Figma file to your client and saying, here, we're done. It's not representative of the work that they do. They can't put their name next to it. They're not going to put their name next to it. If a photographer does agree to hand them over, you might actually want to think twice about hiring them because they probably just don't understand the ramifications there, and they're probably not experienced enough to know that that's not really what you're asking for or what you want. Generally, what you do want are going to be uncropped files, highest resolution files, uncompressed files. That's going to give you the flexibility to crop them the different ways depending on what you need for the website. And this is one of those places where a photographer that's used to doing websites will be more than happy to give that to you. But they're not going to give you those digital negatives. Just like hiring the right website developer or designer is going to make or break a project, so will hiring the right photographer or videographer. So keep some of the things that I just mentioned in mind, and also make sure that you keep communication open both ways and that you're listening to each other, and hopefully things will go just fine.